At 6:37 a.m., I walked outside in bunny slippers and a robe, holding a coffee mug that said "World's Sleepiest Teen." That's when I saw it, a bright yellow violation slip taped to our windshield. "Parking over curb line," it read. $250 fine. Funny thing was, we were parked inside our own damn driveway. I didn't wake up my dad. I woke up the HOA instead. I tore the slip off, read it again to make sure I wasn't hallucinating, and stared at the stretch of concrete between our truck's bumper and the curb. A solid 3 feet. We weren't even close to violating anything. Except maybe the president's ego. That's when I knew. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a message. I didn't fully understand it yet, but the HOA had just poked the wrong bear. Our ranch wasn't like the others. We weren't squeezed into the little pastel homes that lined the neighborhood like bricks in a prison yard. We had land. Real land. 5 acres stretching back into the hills, handed down from my grandfather, who built the place before half the state had running water. We had cows, chickens, and a fence older than any HOA meeting ever held. The street had slowly developed over the years. One house here, a streetlight there. Then came the Homeowners Association, with their clipboards, matching polos, and a God complex. They started enforcing rules on people who never asked for them. And then they got bold. Last week, we got a letter in the mailbox claiming our property fell under Phase 3 community oversight, whatever that meant. My dad laughed and tossed it into the fire pit. We'd never signed anything, never agreed to any covenant. That was supposed to be the end of it. Until this morning. I walked back inside holding the violation like it was radioactive. My dad was already up, standing at the kitchen sink, shirtless, sipping his own coffee like he could smell the drama. He took one look at the paper in my hand and nodded once. "They started it," he said. "Let's finish it." An hour later, we walked to the end of the long gravel driveway and froze. Sometime between last night and this morning, someone had installed a brand new gate. Not a wooden ranch-style gate either. This was suburban chic. Metal bars, keypad entry, and a smug little sign that said "Controlled Community Entry" in italic letters. It cut off the entrance to our property completely. Right there, on our land, with no warning. I wanted to scream. Instead, I punched the code pad a few times just to see what would happen. Nothing. No beep, no unlock, no anything. Just dead silence and that locked metal gate looking back at me like a middle finger. As if summoned by sarcasm, a golf cart rolled up. It was her. Karen. That's not a nickname. That's actually her name. President of the HOA, defender of aesthetic values, queen of enforcing pointless rules. She stepped out like she was arriving at a press conference and smiled. "You'll need the new code to exit the property," she said sweetly. "We've upgraded the gate for the safety of the entire community. But since your property falls under new jurisdiction, access must be registered." "Jurisdiction," my dad said, crossing his arms. "You got a court order I missed?" Karen's smile didn't move. She held out a clipboard with a neatly printed form. "Annual access fee, $1,200. Signature required. Payment due by end of the month." I laughed. It came out louder than I intended, echoing across the driveway. "You want us to pay to enter our own ranch?" "Technically," Karen said, brushing a piece of lint off her shoulder, "you're using community infrastructure now. The gate protects everyone. If you choose not to participate, you'll need to find alternative access." Alternative access. I almost spit out my coffee. There was no other road. Just this one, which ran over land my family had always owned. My dad looked like he was trying very hard not to start a bonfire with the clipboard. We didn't say anything. We turned around and walked back up the driveway. Karen got back into her little cart and drove away like she'd just signed the Treaty of Versailles. But this wasn't a treaty. It was war. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my grandfather, about the time he told me this land would always protect us if we respected it. He hadn't been wrong. But no one said anything about needing a damn code to walk out your front door. The next morning, things got worse. My dad's truck was towed right out of our driveway. Apparently, the HOA had reported it for being an unregistered vehicle inside community limit. We didn't even get a knock on the door. Just an oil stain where the truck used to be. I started walking to school that day, through the ditch and around the side fence, cutting across bramble just to avoid the gate. When I got to the main road, I looked back at the entrance. That sleek metal frame. That keypad. That smug little sign. I took out my phone and snapped a photo. Later that night, we uploaded it to the county GIS map, overlaid with the survey lines we had buried in the barn. It was all there in black and white. The HOA had installed their fancy gate on land that didn't belong to them. Not even a little. It was our land, our driveway, our property, and they had no idea what kind of mistake they'd just made. We didn't call the cops. We didn't call a lawyer. We called our cousin, who happened to run a fencing company. And we started planning. No one locks a rancher out of his own land and walks away smiling. Not if he's got history behind him, a map in his hand, and a family that doesn't scare easy. The HOA thought they'd boxed us in. They had no clue we were just getting started. We didn't say a word to Karen after that morning. Not a single reply, not a single phone call, not even a look in her direction. That's how you scare people like her. Not with yelling or fighting, but with silence. Real silence. The kind that means something is moving beneath the surface. My dad had that look in his eyes, the same one Grandpa used to get when someone tried to argue over cattle tags or fencing lines. Cold. Focused. Like he was watching dominoes line up in his head before knocking them over one by one. While the HOA played pretend sheriff, we started gathering ammunition of a different kind. Paperwork. The first stop was the barn. Up in the loft, buried beneath a moth-eaten tarp and a crate labeled Taxes 1974, we found the old black metal box Grandpa had locked with a key no one thought we'd ever need again. But we found the key. It was taped inside an old cowboy boot, hidden behind a framed photo of him holding me as a toddler on his knee. We opened the box and inside were land surveys, handwritten notes, stamped property lines, and, most importantly, an easement agreement from 1982. It was signed by the original developer of the area and Grandpa himself. It granted our family full, irrevocable access to the private road that had become the main entry point to the neighborhood. Back then, there was no HOA. Just a gravel road and a handshake deal that was sealed legally by the county. That easement wasn't just some casual promise. It was notarized, recorded, and still legally binding. It included a line that made my dad grin when he read it out loud. The landowner shall retain unconditional right of ingress and egress without obstruction or limitation. In plain terms, nobody could block us. Not a gate. Not a board vote. Not even Karen in her pastel cardigan. We made our second stop at the county recorder's office. The clerk behind the desk, a middle-aged man with thick glasses and a tie that had seen better decades, whistled when he saw the documents. He pulled up the digital property maps and overlaid them on the current satellite images. What we saw was clear as day. The new HOA gate, installed less than a week ago, sat a full 20 feet inside our property line. Not near it. Not adjacent. On it. We printed everything and made copies. We left one set with the county clerk and another with my cousin Derek, who had his law degree and a specialty in property dispute. Derek took one look at the photos and said, "This is gonna be fun." But we didn't file a lawsuit. Not yet. That wasn't our style. My dad always believed the best way to win a fight was to make the other person think they'd already lost it. So we played along. For one more week, we let them believe we were stuck. We walked around the side fence. We didn't drive. We didn't complain. But during that week, something else happened. Karen started sending letters. The first one claimed we were in violation of community standards for having uncut brush near our mailbox. The second claimed we had an unregistered livestock enclosure, referring to our chicken coop that had stood in the same spot for 15 years. The third? That was the one that made my dad laugh until he choked on his coffee. It accused us of suspicious activity, for walking around the perimeter of our own land. That was the last straw. The next morning, while Karen and her clipboard army were probably hosting a brunch about Shrub Heights, we made our move. Derek had done some digging into the gate contractor. Turns out the HOA never paid them in full. Apparently, the HOA board had promised full payment upon project approval, but got ahead of themselves and installed the gate prematurely. The invoice was still outstanding. Derek made a call. 12 hours later, the contractor emailed us a bill of sale. For $400 we bought the gate. Not the land, not the keypad, just the actual gate itself. It was legal, clean, and fully documented. It was now our property. That night, just past midnight, we drove out in Derek's pickup, parked outside the fence, and got to work. My dad unscrewed the keypad housing while I held the flashlight. Derek installed a new lock and code box. My cousin Mason welded a new plate over the gate's side that read private entry. We didn't even try to hide it. We wanted them to see it in the morning. At sunrise, I sat on the porch with my coffee and watched the HOA patrol roll by. Karen stopped, got out of her golf cart, walked up to the gate, punched the code. Nothing happened. She tried again, and again. Then she turned and spotted the new plate. Her lips moved, reading it. Her face turned the color of expired yogurt. She marched up to the porch like she had authority over the weather. "What did you do to our gate?" she snapped. Dad didn't flinch. "Not your gate anymore," he said. "It's ours. Bought it fair and square. You can call the company if you'd like. Here's the invoice." He handed her a copy. She stared at it like it was written in Klingon. Then she noticed the no trespassing sign freshly nailed to the wooden fence. "You can't do this," she hissed. "Actually, we can," I said, stepping up beside him. "You're the one trespassing now. This is private property. We're happy to let you walk back to your golf cart. Or we can call the sheriff." She stood frozen for a moment, torn between her sense of entitlement and the sudden realization she was no longer in control. Then she spun on her heel and stormed back to her cart, tires screeching on gravel as she retreated. As she disappeared down the hill, my dad leaned back in his chair and smiled. "It's not about the gate," he said. "It's about the message. You don't mess with people who've been here longer than your rulebook's been printed." We had reclaimed the entrance. But this was only the beginning. We had paperwork, ownership, and quiet resolve. The HOA had meetings and attitude. They had no idea we were still holding back the biggest card of all. The next morning felt different. Peaceful, sure, but heavy, like the still air before a thunderstorm. Dad was fixing a hinge on the chicken coop, and I was brushing dust off the mailbox when we heard it. Not a storm. A golf cart engine. And not just one, two, maybe three. Rolling up like it was some kind of HOA parade. Karen was in the lead, of course, sun visor on, clipboard in hand, lips pursed like she was preparing to taste something sour. Behind her came two more board members. Rick, the guy who'd once fined a neighbor for having a garden gnome, and Cheryl, who still thought our cows needed to be leashed. They stopped outside the gate, stepped out, and stared at the new lock, the new keypad, and the bold metal plate that now read private property. Access by owner only. Karen lifted her sunglasses like she couldn't believe her eyes. She started pressing buttons again. Nothing happened, obviously. Then she pulled out her phone and dialed. I watched from the porch. I didn't have to hear what she was saying. I could tell from her hands waving and the pacing that she wasn't getting the answer she wanted. Probably trying the contractor. Probably hearing that the gate had, indeed, been sold. To us. Dad didn't say anything. He just sipped his coffee like it was the best brew of his life. Finally, Karen stormed back to the gate and shouted, "You've illegally seized a community security structure." Dad called back calmly, "It's not a community structure if it's on our deeded land and you didn't pay for it. That's just a fancy pile of metal we bought off a contractor." Rick tried to step around the gate and walk up the side. but the barbed wire fence, recently reinforced, stopped him. "This is a clear obstruction," Cheryl snapped. "We're going to call law enforcement." "Be our guest," I said. "Just make sure they bring a copy of the county property map. And maybe a tape measure while they're at it." An hour later, a sheriff's cruiser rolled up. Officer Dalton stepped out. Local guy. Knew my dad, went to school with my uncle. He was neutral, sure, but not naive. He listened patiently as Karen explained how we were blocking a vital community access point, endangering the safety of the entire subdivision, and exhibiting threatening behavior by weaponizing land ownership. Then Dad handed him a copy of the easement agreement, and the property survey, and the bill of sale for the gate. Dalton didn't need long. He nodded slowly, scratched his beard, and said, "From what I see here, the gate's on your land. The HOA never had legal right to install it in the first place. It's your property now. They can't enter without permission." Karen's jaw dropped. Rick actually sputtered. Cheryl muttered something about escalating to the city council. "Feel free," Dalton said. "But this isn't a city issue. It's a deed issue. And this family's got the paperwork." They left in a flurry of frustration. But we weren't done. Not yet. Because the very next day, we found signs posted along the trail behind our property. Large, laminated ones that read, "Private Community Trail, no ranch access. Violators will be fined." Funny thing was, that trail cut through the back edge of our property too. Another forgotten easement, one Grandpa had negotiated with the developers years ago, allowing pedestrian use but retaining full ownership. They'd used it as a community perk, calling it a scenic path, but it was still our dirt, our trees, our rules. So the next morning, I saddled up Bandit, my favorite horse, and rode the entire trail twice, just to make a point. I strapped my GoPro to my chest and waved at the cameras I knew the HOA had hidden in the trees. I waved at the joggers. I waved at the dog walkers. Most of them waved back. That night, I edited the footage, added a country music track, and uploaded it with the title, "Riding My Own Trail While HOA Tries to Find Me for It." Within 24 hours, it had 10,000 views. By the weekend, it had 100,000. People loved it. The comments were gold. "This kid's a legend. Someone buy this family a new tractor." HOA stands for hilariously overreaching authority. The story got picked up by a local news blogger, then a national subreddit. Soon, strangers were sending us photos of their own HOA battles. It was like a club, unofficial but loud. Meanwhile, Karen was unraveling. Rumor had it she'd started replying to comments online, trying to defend herself. Big mistake. Every time she posted something about neighborhood safety or community compliance, people just responded with memes of locked gates, ranch horses, and coffee mugs that said, "World's sleepiest teen." We didn't stop there. Derek, our cousin lawyer, filed a formal cease and desist against the HOA for trespassing, misuse of property, and illegal signage. We even submitted a bill for land use violations. Small claims court, nice and tidy. But what really broke them was the next bill. Not legal fees. Not towing costs. A toll invoice. Because we found something else in Grandpa's old paperwork. A clause, tucked inside an obscure agreement from 1991, that gave our family the right to charge for any vehicle crossing our property under certain conditions. That included maintenance crews, trash trucks, and yes, HOA board golf carts. The rate? $200 per vehicle per month. We installed motion sensor cameras, logged every crossing, calculated 3 months' worth of back charges. Then mailed the HOA an invoice for $11,600. Karen tried to laugh it off, called it extortion. But Derek attached a cover letter referencing the original deed terms, citing legal precedent and previous court rulings on access tolling. Suddenly, the laughter stopped. They refused to pay. So we filed the claim. HOA board members were served during their own monthly meeting. One guy fainted. Someone knocked over a fruit tray. The cracks were starting to show. Homeowners began to ask questions. Why were their fees going up? Why were they involved in a land dispute they hadn't voted on? Why were they now trending on TikTok under the hashtag #GateGate? Karen held a meeting to try and explain. Only half the board showed up. The rest were avoiding her like a contagious rash. That night, someone left a flyer on our fence. One sentence, handwritten in red ink. Recall Karen? Underneath, a signature sheet. 50 names. The war wasn't over. But the momentum had shifted. We weren't boxed in anymore. We were walking out the front door with our heads high, and charging rent to anyone who followed. 2 days after we sent the toll invoice, a notice appeared on the community bulletin board. All HOA vehicles will temporarily reroute operations to avoid the disputed gate area until further legal resolution. Translation: they were trying to find a way around paying us, but there was no way around it, literally. The only entrance that could support heavy vehicles like garbage trucks and landscaping trailers was the one that crossed our land. Every other path was either too narrow, too steep, or, our personal favorite, not theirs to use. One of those alternate routes ran alongside a creek bed that backed into a protected state wetland. The HOA must have gotten desperate because the next day, we saw survey markers appear along that bank. Pink flags, spray paint, a rolled-up blueprint tacked to a stake. Dad looked at it, then looked at me and said, "They're about to learn what a real violation feels like." We didn't stop them. Not yet. We let the show play out. Over the next 48 hours, a crew arrived with an excavator and started scraping away brush. They were about 10 feet in before a truck from the county's Environmental Preservation Office pulled up. Someone had reported illegal land disturbance. The officer stepped out, clipboard in hand, and walked the crew straight off the property. Turns out, the HOA had failed to apply for a work permit, environmental review, or even basic land use permission. And that blueprint? It was a preliminary sketch downloaded from a landscaping website. They were winging it. That incident didn't just shut down the bypass idea. It earned the HOA a hefty fine, $5,000 for unpermitted land alteration in a wetland buffer zone. Karen tried to spin it as a miscommunication. But by now, even the board members were losing faith. We knew because one of them, Cheryl, actually stopped by our fence one afternoon while I was watering the front hedges. She didn't apologize, but she looked tired, embarrassed, said she didn't sign off on the toll invoice fight or the signs or the rerouting plan, said she was just trying to keep her lawn in shape and had no idea it would turn into a civil war. I nodded politely and offered her some lemonade. She took it and left without saying more. But the fact that she came at all? That was the first real crack. Then came the hearing. Small claims court. A modest building with scuffed tile and folding chairs. Nothing fancy. But we walked in like it was the Supreme Court. Derek had a manila folder stuffed with printed screenshots, time-stamped footage, and maps that had more red markings than a high school essay. The HOA showed up with a junior paralegal and a stack of emails labeled Community Safety Concerns. The judge didn't need long. He flipped through our easement papers, looked at the footage of trash trucks crossing our land, and read the original 1991 clause aloud before looking directly at the HOA rep. "Did you receive notice of toll charges and continue using the property?" "Yes," the rep muttered. "Then you owe them $11,600. Karen wasn't there, but we heard she nearly broke a window when she got the call. The check arrived in a plain envelope 2 weeks later. No note, no apology, just a cold, signed bank draft and a return address that simply read, HOA Treasurer. Dad framed the receipt and nailed it above the fireplace. But we weren't finished. Not yet. They still hadn't removed the signs behind the property. The ones warning us not to use our own trail. And they still hadn't apologized for blocking our driveway, towing our truck, or fining us for fictional violations. So we decided to give them a final lesson in humility, on our terms. First, we bought a second gate. Not for the driveway. This one went up behind the barn, right where the trail intersected with the HOA walking path. Same build. Same keypad. Except this time we added a twist. The new sign read, "Authorized ranch access only. Trespassers will be charged." The keypad? It didn't work. It was fake. Pure decor. The gate stayed locked, and every time a community member jogged up and realized they couldn't complete their loop, we'd kindly redirect them to HOA headquarters with a printed flyer explaining that their access had been temporarily revoked due to improper signage and misuse of shared land. The community started asking questions. Not about us, but about the HOA. One neighbor, a retired Marine named Frank, knocked on our door and asked if we had a copy of the land deed. He'd lived here 20 years and never once got involved with HOA politics, but he wanted to know who exactly had allowed Karen to make decisions that were getting the whole community sued. Another neighbor brought us a pie. Said she didn't agree with everything we'd done, but respected how we fought back. Said it reminded her of when the town tried to shut down her father's farm for having too many goats. The goats stayed. So did she. And then, one Saturday morning, we got the letter. Effective immediately, Karen H. will step down from her position as HOA president due to health and personal concerns. The board will appoint interim leadership until a new vote is held. The letter was taped to every mailbox in the neighborhood. Dad read it out loud, then handed it to me and said, "Go ahead and laugh. You've earned it." But the best twist came later. Derek, our cousin, submitted his name for the HOA election. Just to see what would happen. We didn't expect much. He wasn't even a resident, just our legal proxy on the land title. But according to the HOA bylaws, land ownership qualified him to run. He won. By a landslide. The very first thing he did as president? Remove every single gate-related rule from the HOA charter. The second? Refund arbitrary fines issued over the past 3 years. The third? Vote to install a plaque at the old gate site. It read, "Property rights are not optional." That night, we took down the fake keypad gate and replaced it with an open archway wrapped in string light. No more signs. No more locks. Just a simple wooden welcome sign that said, "Ranchland. Established long before your clipboards." And in the soft glow of those lights, Dad turned to me, handed me that same coffee mug from the first morning, and said, "Next time they try something, we won't need a court. We'll just show them the gate that used to be here." Because we hadn't just bought the gate. We'd bought back our peace. The neighborhood was quieter after the election, but quiet doesn't always mean calm. Karen might have stepped down, but the scars she left behind were still raw. Some neighbors were furious over the HOA's legal losses. Others were embarrassed. Most just wanted to forget the whole thing ever happened. But we hadn't forgotten. Not the early morning violation slip. Not the locked gate. Not the tow truck or the fake citations. And certainly not the smug look on Karen's face when she thought she'd won. So while the neighborhood tried to move on, we got to work on something that would make forgetting impossible. The gate, the original one we bought and relocked, was still there, half rusted, slightly bent from where Mason's torch left scorch marks. Derek, now HOA president, offered to have it removed and scrapped. Dad shook his head. "We're not scrapping anything," he said. "We're going to repurpose it." And that's exactly what we did. We mounted it sideways, posts and all, and installed it at the corner of the ranch as a boundary marker. Welded to the side was a brass plate that read, "This gate was once a weapon, now it's a warning." Underneath, we planted sunflowers. But even with Derek in charge, the HOA wasn't quite done acting like the boss of everyone's property. Old habits die hard. It started again when one of the board's remaining loyalists, a man named Peter, who'd once fined his own niece for flying a kite, began sending community-wide emails suggesting that the open gate policy was eroding neighborhood security, that new leadership was too lax, and inviting non-members to abuse shared spaces. His language got nastier with every week, and soon, a petition started circulating to restore previous security protocols. The thing was, Peter didn't realize how many of those shared spaces weren't really shared. He assumed the lake trail, the gravel path behind the ranch, and the dirt road that wound up toward the orchard were all HOA property. In truth, they were all carved out of easements granted by Grandpa long ago, temporary easements with conditions, and one of those conditions was that any breach of property terms by the HOA or its members would nullify the agreement. So we nullified it. Derek sent out formal letters. Effective immediately, all prior access agreements with the HOA had been terminated due to breach of trust, illegal installations, and harassment. That meant the gravel path was now off-limits. The orchard gate? Locked. The trail? Closed. Peter called an emergency board meeting. We didn't attend, but we heard it ended with a shouting match and someone slamming a binder full of bylaws onto the floor. Then Peter made his final mistake. He hired a contractor to reinstall a new gate at the front of the subdivision. A bigger one. Taller. Automated. Cameras, license plate readers, solar-powered access. He didn't ask the board. Didn't notify the homeowners. Just claimed it was a community-funded emergency security measure. And he placed it 10 feet further up the road than the last one, which once again put it squarely on our land. The next morning, I walked down with a flashlight and measured it, triple-checked the survey. Then I walked back up, called the contractor, and asked who paid them. They said Peter had signed a personal check but used the HOA's EIN number. Then I asked if they had a permit. They didn't. That afternoon, we called the sheriff again. Officer Dalton showed up, same as before, looked at the new gate, whistled, and said, "Well, would you look at that?" He didn't even need the paperwork this time. He just walked over to the keypad, looked at the concrete posts buried into our gravel, and shook his head. I smiled. "Trespassing again?" "Looks like it," he replied. Peter was livid. Showed up 20 minutes later in a red sedan with a dashcam, filming everything and trying to argue that the landline map must have changed. That the satellite data was wrong. That we were creating chaos on purpose. Dalton pointed to the no trespassing sign we'd posted 2 years ago. Then to the brass plate. Then to our framed receipt from the last lawsuit. Peter threatened to call his lawyer. Dalton just said, "Good. They'll need to bring their own measuring tape." Peter left. We gave the contractor 48 hours to remove the gate or it would be taken down and stored, with a storage fee of $25 per day. The contractor didn't even argue. They came back the next morning with a flatbed and hauled it away. Later that week, Derek held a town hall meeting. This time, almost every household showed up. He went through the legal history, reminded everyone of the map boundaries, and then calmly, professionally, outlined a new proposal: dissolve the HOA entirely. You could hear a pin drop. Then Frank, the retired Marine, stood up and said, "Do it." Then Cheryl. Then the woman who once brought us pie. The vote passed. 94% in favor. By the end of the month, the HOA was legally dissolved. All rules, fines, and architectural controls nullified. No more violations for mailbox paint colors. No more citations for unapproved vegetable gardens. No more midnight emails about lawn heights or fence styles. And our driveway? Open. Peaceful. Ours again. With the HOA gone, we hosted a small celebration. Nothing crazy. Just neighbors, folding chairs, cornbread, sweet tea, and a bonfire under the stars. Someone brought an acoustic guitar. Someone else brought cupcakes with little sugar gates stuck in the frosting. I stood next to Dad by the fire pit as the sky went orange and the sun dipped behind the old windmill. "Did we win?" I asked him. He shook his head. "We didn't win. We reminded them what they forgot. Which is that you don't own a community by bossing people. You build one by respecting them." The next day we took the last gate we'd ever deal with, the one Peter tried to install, and repurposed it too. We welded it to a rusted tractor frame and left it on display at the front pasture. Not out of spite. Out of memory. A relic of a time people thought paper rules could outrank common sense. We called it the Gate Graveyard. And on the ranch, with the wind blowing steady and the driveway wide open, life felt simple again. The way Grandpa built it. The way we were always meant to live. A month after the HOA dissolved, peace settled in like morning fog over our ranch. Quiet, soft, and a little unbelievable. For the first time in years, no one measured our lawn, fined our mailbox, or cited us for fictional offenses. Neighbors actually waved instead of reporting each other. No more clipboards. No more smug golf cart parades. Just the rustle of leaves, the occasional moo from a pasture, and the steady rhythm of life returning to normal. But even in peace, reminders of the past remained. We kept the repurposed gate as promised. It stood at the far edge of the property, bolted to an old cedar post, surrounded by wildflowers. Birds perched on its bars. The brass plaque still glinted in the sun. It had once been a symbol of control, of someone else telling us what we could and couldn't do on land we bled for, worked for, and loved. Now, it was a symbol of what happens when you fight back with truth and patience. One morning, while sipping coffee on the porch, I noticed a familiar face walking up the path. Karen. Dressed in plain jeans, no clipboard in sight, holding a covered dish awkwardly like it weighed 100 pounds. My dad glanced up from where he was patching the chicken wire, and raised an eyebrow. I stood to meet her halfway. "I'm not here to fight," she said quickly, hands up. "Or lecture. Or fine anyone. I owed you this." She held out the dish. Peach cobbler. Homemade, still warm. I took it cautiously. "What's the catch?" "No catch," she said. "I've had a lot of time to think. You were right. I got so caught up in rules and meetings that I forgot people lived here. Real people. Not just policy." It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was close enough. I nodded and motioned her toward the porch. She hesitated, then followed. We sat. My dad didn't say much, just offered her coffee, then returned to his work like this was any other Tuesday. Karen looked out over the fields, quiet for a long time. "I used to think fences kept people safe," she said. "But I realize now they can also keep people out. And not just physically." I didn't say anything. She'd come to her own conclusion, and that was enough. After a while, she stood and offered a small smile. "Thanks for not holding a grudge." I smiled back. "We don't hold grudges. We just document everything." She laughed. Not the sharp, smug laugh I'd remembered from HOA meetings, but a softer one. Human. Then she turned and walked back down the path, the empty plate tucked under her arm. Word must have spread, because over the next few weeks we got more visitors. Neighbors who had never set foot past our fence showed up to say hello. Some brought casseroles. Some brought stories. All of them brought curiosity. We gave them tours of the barn, let their kids feed the goats, and showed them where the infamous gate once stood. Everyone had heard the stories. Everyone had questions. The best one came from a little girl named Lily. "Why didn't you just move?" It was innocent, sincere. She couldn't understand why anyone would go through all this trouble over a road and a gate. My dad knelt beside her and said, "Because if someone steals your front door, you don't move houses. You get your door back." She thought about that for a second, then nodded solemnly. "Okay." The local news station eventually did a segment on us. A short documentary titled, "The Gate War." They filmed interviews with Dad, Derek, and even Cheryl. Karen declined to appear, but sent in a written statement praising the value of community and the importance of learning from mistakes. The footage went viral again, this time with more laughs than rage. Memes came back. Someone printed shirts that said, "Gatekeeper no more." Someone else made mugs that read, "World's sleepiest teen, now HOA free." We bought 10. But for us, it wasn't about fame. It was about finally being able to live on our land the way Grandpa always intended. Freely. Without interference. Without bureaucracy. One quiet evening, I walked out to the field where the gate marker stood. Fireflies danced around the post. The wind rustled through the high grass. I ran my hand over the metal and smiled. It was no longer a battle scar. It was a monument to stubbornness, resilience, and a little bit of pettiness, all rolled into one. Behind me, I heard the porch door creak open. Dad stepped out, his silhouette framed by the golden porch light. He walked down and stood beside me. "Never thought we'd outlast an HOA," he said. "Never thought we'd run one," I replied. He laughed. "Grandpa would have been proud." I nodded. "He would have bought a second gate just for fun." We stood there in silence for a while, watching the stars blink to life. Eventually, he turned and asked, "You still got that mug?" I held it up. "Always." He grinned. "Then let's close the book." The next morning, we hosted one final gathering. Not a celebration. Not a party. Just a simple open field day where anyone could show up, walk the land, ask questions, or just sit on the porch and enjoy some peach cobbler. We laid out lawn chairs, put up a picnic table, and invited anyone who'd ever been fined, warned, or cited by the old HOA. Over 50 people came. Some we barely knew. Others we used to wave to but never speak with. They shared stories, laughed, talked about chickens and fences and rogue golf carts. And as the sun dipped low, someone asked what we'd call the ranch now that it was free. Dad raised his glass and said, "Home. No rules. No codes. No gatekeepers. Just a porch, a field, and the peace that comes after a long, hard-fought silence." And that's how it ended, not with a bang or a lawsuit or even another locked gate, but with a gate turned into a flower post. A ranch returned to its rhythm, and a family sipping coffee on their land, knowing they never backed down.